Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to Holes, chapters 11 through 15. Stanley returned to his hole. It wasn't fair. Mr. Pendanski had even said his fossil was interesting. He slammed his shovel into the ground and pried up another piece of earth. After a while, he noticed X-Ray had come by and was watching him dig. "Hey, caveman, let me talk to you a second," X-Ray said. Stanley put down his shovel and stepped up out of his hole. "Say, listen," said X-Ray. "If you find something else, give it to me, okay?" Stanley wasn't sure what to say. X-Ray was clearly the leader of the group, and Stanley didn't want to get on his bad side. "You're new here, right?" said X-Ray. "I've been here for almost a year. I've never found anything. You know, my eyesight's not so good. No one knows this, but you know why my name's X-Ray?" Stanley shrugged one shoulder. "It's Pig Latin for Rex. That's all. I'm too blind for anything to find anything." Stanley tried to remember how Pig Latin worked. "I mean," X-Ray went on, "why should you get a day off when you've only been here a couple of days? Anyone gets a day off, it should be me. That's only fair, right?" "I guess," Stanley agreed. X-Ray smiled. "You're a good guy, caveman." Stanley picked up his shovel. The more he thought about it, the more he was glad that he agreed to let X-Ray have anything he might find. If he was going to survive at Camp Green Lake, it was far more important that X-Ray think that he was a good guy than it was for him to get one day off. Besides, he didn't expect to find anything anyway. There probably wasn't anything of interest out there, and even if there was, he'd never been what you call lucky. He slammed his blade into the ground and then dumped out another shovelful of dirt. It was a little surprising, he thought, that X-Ray was the leader of the group, since he obviously wasn't the biggest or the toughest. In fact, except for Zero, X-Ray was the smallest. Armpit was the biggest. Zigzag may have been taller than Armpit, but that was really only because of his neck. Yet Armpit and all the others seemed to be willing to do whatever X-Ray asked of them. As Stanley dug up another shovelful of dirt, it occurred to him that Armpit wasn't the biggest. He, the caveman, was bigger. He was glad they called him Caveman. It meant they accepted him as a member of the group. He would even have been glad if they even had called him Barfbag. It was really quite remarkable to him. At school, bullies like Derek Dunn used to pick on him. Yet Derek Dunn would be scared senseless by any of the boys here. As he dug his hole, Stanley thought about what it would be like if Derek Dunn had to fight Armpit or Squid. Derek wouldn't stand a chance. He imagined what it would be like if he became good friends with all of them. And then for some reason, they all went with him to his school. And then Derek Dunn tried to steal his notebook. "Just what do you think you're doing?" asked Squid as he slams his hands into Derek Dunn's smug face. "Caveman's our friend," says Armpit, grabbing him by the shin collar. Stanley played the scene over and over again in his mind, each time watching another boy from Group D beat up Derek Dunn. It helped him dig his hole and ease his own suffering. Whatever pain he felt was being felt 10 times worse by Derek. Chapter 12. Again, Stanley was the last one to finish digging. It was late afternoon when he dragged himself back to the compound. This time, he would have accepted a ride on the truck if it was offered. When he got to the tent, he found Mr. Pendanski and the other boys sitting in a circle on the ground. "Welcome, Stanley," said Mr. Pendanski. "Hey, caveman, you get your hole dug?" asked Magnet. He managed to nod. "You spitting it?" asked Squid. He nodded again. "You're right," he said to X-Ray. "Second hole's the hardest." X-Ray shook his head. "The third hole's the hardest," he said. "Come join our circle," said Mr. Pendanski. Stanley plopped down between Squid and Magnet. He needed to rest up before taking a shower. "We've been discussing what we want to do with our lives," said Mr. Pendanski. "We're not going to be at Camp Green Lake forever. We need to prepare for the day we leave here and join the rest of society. Hey, that's great, Mom, said Magnet. They're finally going to let you out of here. The other boys laughed. Okay, Jose, said Mr. Pendanski. What do you want to do with your life? I don't know, said Magnet. You need to think about that, said Mr. Pendanski. It's important to have goals. Otherwise, you're going to end up right back in jail. What do you like to do? I don't know, said Magnet. Well, you must like something, said Mr. Pendanski. I like animals, said Magnet. Good, said Mr. Pendanski. Does anyone know of any jobs that involve animals? Veterinarian, said Armpit. That's right, said Mr. Pendanski. He could work in the zoo, said Zigzag. He belongs in the zoo, said Squid. And then he and X-Ray laughed. How about you, Stanley? Any ideas for Jose? Stanley sighed. Animal trainer, he said. Like for the circus or movies or something like that. Any of those jobs sound good to you, Jose? Asked Mr. Pendanski. Yeah, I like what Caveman said about training animals for movies. I think it'd be fun to train monkeys. X-Ray laughed. Don't laugh, Rex, said Mr. Pendanski. We don't laugh at people's dreams. Someone is going to have to train monkeys for the movies. Who are you kidding, Mom? Asked X-Ray. Magnet's never going to be a monkey trainer. You don't know that, said Mr. Pendanski. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Nothing in life is easy, but that's no reason to give up. You'd be surprised what you can accomplish if you set your mind to it. And after all, you only have one life, so you should try to make the most of it. Stanley tried to figure out what he'd say if Mr. Pendanski asked him what he wanted to do with his life. He used to think that he wanted to work for the FBI, but this didn't seem to be the appropriate place to mention that. So far, you've all done a pretty good job of messing up your lives, said Mr. Pendanski. I know you think you're cool, he looked at Stanley. So you're a caveman now, huh? You like digging holes, caveman? Stanley didn't know what to say. Well, let me tell you something, caveman. You're here on account of one person. If it wasn't for that person, you wouldn't be here digging holes in the hot sun. You know who that person is. My no good, dirty, rotten, pig stealing great-great-grandfather? The other boys howled with laughter. Even Zero smiled. It was the first time Stanley had ever seen Zero smile. He usually had such an angry expression on his face, and now he had a huge smile that it almost seemed too big for his face, like the smile was on a jack-o'-lantern. No, said Mr. Pendanski, that person is you, Stanley. You're the reason you're here. You're responsible for yourself. You messed up your life, and it's up to you to fix it. No one is going to do it for you. For any of you. Mr. Pendanski looked from one boy to another. You're all special in your own way, he said. You've all got something to offer. You have to think about what you want to do and then do it. Even you, Zero. You're not completely worthless. The smile was now gone from Zero's face. What do you want to do with your life? Mr. Pendanski asked him. Zero's mouth was shut tight. As he glared at Mr. Pendanski, his dark eyes seemed to expand. What about it, Zero? Asked Mr. Pendanski. What do you like to do? I like to dig holes. Chapter 13. All too soon, Stanley was back out on the lake, sticking his shovel into the dirt. X-Ray was right. The third hole was the hardest. And so was the fourth hole, and the fifth hole, and the sixth, He dug his shovel into the dirt. And after a while, he'd lost track of the day and how many holes he dug. It all seemed like one big hole, and it would take a year and a half to dig it. He guessed he'd lost at least 5 pounds. He figured that in a year and a half, he'd either be in great physical condition or else dead. He dug his shovel into the dirt. It couldn't always be this hot, he thought. Surely it got cooler in December. Maybe then they froze. He dug his shovel into the dirt. His skin had gotten tougher. It didn't hurt so much to hold the shovel. As he drank from his canteen, he looked up at the sky. A cloud had appeared earlier in the day. It was the first cloud he could remember seeing since coming to Camp Green Lake. He and the other boys had been watching it all day, hoping it would move in front of the sun. Occasionally it got close, but it was just teasing them. His hole was waist deep. He dug his shovel into the dirt, and as he dumped it out, he thought he saw something glisten as it fell into the dirt pile. Whatever it was quickly buried. Stanley stared at the pile a moment, unsure if he'd even seen it. Even if it was something, what good would it do him? He had promised to give anything he found to X-ray. It didn't seem worth the effort to climb out of his hole to check it out. He glanced up at the cloud, which was close enough to the sun that he had to squint to look at it. He dug his shovel back into the earth, scooped out some dirt, and lifted it over his dirt pile. But instead of dumping it there, he tossed it off into the side. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. He climbed up out of his hole and sifted his fingers through the pile. He felt something hard and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a gold tube, about as long and as wide as the second finger on his right hand. The tube was open at one end and closed at the other. He used a few drops of his precious water to clean it. There seemed to be some kind of design on the flat, closed end. He poured a few more drops of water on it and rubbed it on the inside of his pants pocket. He looked again at the design engraved in the flat bottom of the tube. He could see an outline of a heart with the letters KB etched inside it. Etched means written. He tried to figure out some way that he wouldn't have to give it to X-ray. He could just keep it, but that wouldn't do him any good. He wanted a day off. He looked at the large piles of dirt near where X-ray was digging. X-ray was probably almost finished for the day, so getting the rest of the day off would hardly do him much good. X-ray would have to show the tube to Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski, who would then have to show it to the warden, and by then X-ray might be done anyway. Stanley wondered about trying to secretly take the tube directly to the warden. He could explain the situation to the warden, and the warden might make an excuse for giving him the day off so X-ray wouldn't suspect. He looked across the lake towards the cabin under the 2 oak trees. The place scared him. He had been in Camp Green Lake almost 2 weeks, and he still hadn't seen the warden. This was just as well. If he could go this entire year and a half without seeing the warden, then that would be fine with him. Besides, he didn't know if the warden would find the tube interesting. He looked at it again. It looked familiar. He thought he had seen something like it somewhere before, but he couldn't place it. What do you got there, caveman? Asked Zigzag. Stanley's large hand closed around the tube. Nothing. Just nothing. It was useless. I think I might have found something. Another fossil? No, I'm not sure what it is. Let me see, said Zigzag. Instead of showing it to Zigzag, Stanley brought it to Zigzag, X-ray, and Zigzag followed. X-ray looked at the tube, then rubbed his dirty glasses on his dirty shirt, looked at the tube again. One by one, the other boys dropped their shovels and came to look. It looks like an old shotgun shell, said Squid. Yeah, that's probably what it is, said Stanley. He decided not to mention the engraved design. Maybe nobody would notice it. He doubted X-ray would see it. No, it's too long and thin to be a shotgun shell. That's something that happens after you fire a shotgun, said Magnet. It's probably just a piece of junk, said Stanley. Well, I'll show it to Mom, said X-ray. Let's see what he thinks. Who knows? Maybe I'll get the day off. Your hole's almost finished, said Stanley. Yeah, so? Stanley raised and lowered his shoulder. So why don't you wait until tomorrow to show it to Mom, he suggested. You could pretend you found it first thing in the morning. Then get the whole day off, instead of just an hour or so this afternoon. X-ray smiled. Good thinking, caveman. He dropped the tube into his large pocket on the right leg of his dirty orange pants. Stanley returned to his hole. When the water truck came, Stanley started to take his place at the end of the line, but X-ray told him to get behind Magnet in front of Zero. Stanley moved up one place in line. Chapter 14. That night, as Stanley lay in his scratchy, smelly cot, he tried to figure out what he could have done differently, but there was nothing he can do. For once in his unlucky life, he was in the right place at the right time, and it still didn't help him. You got it? He asked X-Ray the next morning at breakfast. X-Ray looked at him with half-open eyes and his dirty glasses. I don't know what you're talking about, he grumbled. You know, said Stanley. No, I don't know, X-Ray snapped. Just leave me alone, okay? I don't want to talk to you. Stanley didn't say another word. Mr. Sir marched the boys out to the lake, chewing sunflower seeds along the way and spitting out the shells. He scraped the ground with his boot heel to mark where each boy was supposed to dig. Stanley stamped down on the back of the blade of his shovel, piercing the hard, dry earth. He couldn't figure out why X-Ray had snapped at him. If he wasn't going to produce the tube, why did he make Stanley give it to him? Was he going to keep it? The tube was gold in color, but Stanley didn't think it was real gold. The water truck came a little after sunrise. Stanley finished his last drop of water and stepped out of his hole, and at this time of day, Stanley sometimes could see some distant hills or mountains on the other side of the lake. They were only visible for a short while and would soon disappear behind the haze of heat and dirt. The truck stopped, and the dust cloud drifted past it. X-Ray took his place at the front of the line. Mr. Pandansky filled his canteen. Thanks, Mom, X-Ray said, and he didn't mention the tube. Mr. Pandansky filled all the canteens and then climbed back into the cab of the pickup. He still had to bring water to Group E. Stanley could see them digging about 200 yards away. Mr. Pandansky, X-Ray shouted from his hole. Wait, Mr. Pandansky, I think I might have found something. The boys all followed Mr. Pandansky as he walked over to X-Ray's hole. Stanley could see the gold tube sticking out of some dirt at the end of X-Ray's shovel. Mr. Pandansky opened it and took a long look at its flat bottom. I think the warden is going to like this. Does X-Ray get the day off? Asked Squid. Just keep digging until someone says otherwise, Mr. Pandansky said. And then he smiled. But if I were you, Rex, I wouldn't dig too hard. Stanley watched the cloud of dust move across the lake to the cabin beneath the trees. The boys in Group E were just going to have to wait. It didn't take long for the pickup to return. Mr. Pandansky stepped out of the cab. A tall woman with red hair stepped out of the passenger side. She looked even taller than she was since Stanley was down in his hole. She wore a black cowboy hat and black cowboy boots, which were studded with turquoise stones, and the sleeves on her shirt were rolled up and her arms were covered with freckles, as was her face. She walked right up to X-Ray. This where you found it? Yes, ma'am. Your good work will be rewarded, she turned to Mr. Pandansky. Drive X-Ray back to camp, let him take a double shower, and give him some clean clothes. But first, I want you to fill everyone's canteen. I just filled them a little while ago, said Mr. Pandansky. The warden stared hard at him. Excuse me, she said. Their voice was soft. I had just filled them when Rex... Excuse me, the warden said again. Did I ask you when you last filled them? No, but it's just... Excuse me. Mr. Pandansky stopped talking. The warden wiggled her finger for him to come over to her. It's hot, and it's only going to be hotter, she said. Now, these fine boys have been working hard. Don't you think it might be possible that they might have taken a drink since you last filled their canteens? Mr. Pandansky said nothing. The warden turned to Stanley. Caveman, will you come here, please? Stanley was surprised that she knew his name. He had never seen her until she stepped out of the truck, and he didn't even know the warden was a woman. He nervously went towards her. Mr. Pandansky and I have been having a discussion. Have you taken a drink since Mr. Pandansky last filled your canteen? Stanley didn't want to cause any trouble for Mr. Pandansky. I still got plenty left, he said. Excuse me? He stopped. Yeah, I drank some. Thank you. May I see your canteen, please? Stanley handed it to her. Her fingernails were painted dark red. She gently took the canteen, letting the water swish inside the plastic container. Do you hear the empty spaces? She asked. Yes, said Mr. Pandansky. Then fill it, she said. And the next time I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it without questioning my authority. If it's too much trouble for you to fill a canteen, I'll give you a shovel, and you can dig the hole, and the caveman can fill your canteen. She turned back to Stanley. I don't think that would be too much trouble for you, would it? No, said Stanley. I'll fill the canteen, said Mr. Pendanski. Thank you. Chapter 15. Mr. Pendanski filled the canteens. The warden got a pitchfork out of the back of the pickup. She poked it through the X-rays dirt pile to see if anything else might have been buried in there as well. After you drop off the X-ray, I want you to bring back 3 wheelbarrows, she said. X-ray got into the pickup, and as the truck pulled away, he leaned out the wide window and waved. Zero, said the warden, I want you to take over X-ray's hole. She seemed to know that Zero was the fastest digger. Armpit and Squid, you will keep digging where you've been, she said, but you're each going to have a helper. Zigzag, you help Armpit. Magnet will help Squid. And Caveman, you'll work with Zero. We're going to dig the dirt twice. Zero will dig it out of the hole. Caveman will carefully shovel it into the wheelbarrow. Zigzag will do the same for Armpit, and the same with Magnet and Squid. We don't want to miss anything. If either of you find something, you both get the rest of the day off and a double shower. When the wheelbarrows are full, you are to dump them away from this area. We don't want any dirt piles to get in the way. The warden remained at the site for the remainder of the day, along with Mr. Pendanski and Mr. Sir, who showed up after a while. Occasionally, Mr. Sir would leave to take water to the other groups of campers, but otherwise he and the water truck stayed parked there. The warden saw to it that nobody in Group D was ever thirsty. Stanley did as he was told. He carefully looked through all the dirt dug up by Zero as he shoveled it into the wheelbarrow, though he knew he wouldn't find anything. It was easier than digging his own hole. When the wheelbarrow was full, he took it a good distance away before dumping it. The warden couldn't keep still. She kept walking around, looking over the boys' shoulders and sticking her pitchfork through the dirt piles. You're doing fine, just fine, she told Stanley. After a while, she told the boys to switch places so that Stanley, Zigzag, and Magnet dug the holes, and Zero, Armpit, and Squid shoveled the excavated dirt into the wheelbarrows. After lunch, Zero took over the digging again, and Stanley returned to the wheelbarrow. There's no hurry, the warden said several times. The main thing is not to miss anything. Boys dug until each hole was well over 6 feet deep and wide. Still, it was easier for 2 boys to dig a 6-foot hole than it was for 1 boy to dig a 5-foot hole. All right, it's enough for today, the warden said. I've waited this long, I can wait another day. Mr. Sir drove her back to the cabin. I wonder how she knew all of our names, Stanley said as he walked back to the compound. She watches us all the time, said Zigzag. She's got hidden microphones and cameras all over the place, in the tents, the rec room, the shower. The shower? Asked Stanley. He wondered if Zigzag was just being paranoid. The cameras are tiny, said Armpit. No bigger than the toenail on your little toe. Stanley had his doubts about that. He didn't think they could make cameras that small. Microphones, maybe. He realized that was why X-Ray didn't want to talk to him about the gold tube at breakfast. X-Ray was afraid that the warden might have been listening. One thing was certain. They were digging to build character. They were definitely looking for something. And whatever they were looking for, they were looking in the wrong place. Stanley gazed out across the lake towards the spot where he had been digging yesterday when he found the golden tube. He dug the hole into his memory. Boys and girls, thank you for listening to Holes, chapters 11 through 15. See you soon.